Every once in a while, there's an idea in my head that won't just quite go away. I doubt I'm the only one who's ever had this idea. It always comes to me whenever I'm around an arcade machine. You see, I always loved the buttons on the arcade machines, the colors, the clicks, the sounds, the feel, and I always wondered what if someone took a keyboard, took a whole bunch of these buttons, and replaced all the keys with them. So that's exactly what we're gonna do. And it all starts with this keyboard right here. I got myself this cheap little $10 keyboard. I got this one because it has a removable USB-C cord on the back of it, so I can use my own. It also has removable keycaps and switches, so it exposes 2 pins that I think I can easily attach some arcade buttons to. Well, that's the idea anyway. For the arcade buttons themselves, I ended up getting myself 85 of these Suzo Happ buttons. They're definitely my favorite. I also came with 85 of these little micro switches. They're pretty cool. They're nice solid switches that are really durable and reliable. And these buttons are super easy to install. You just slide it in a hole, you screw in the back part, and the switches just kind of slide and click into place. Just like that, and we got our button. But we're also going to need a whole bunch of wires to make this thing work. Now that we have all the parts, it's time to start making the enclosure for this. I grab myself 2 boards of pine, I pull out my table saw and I get it nice and ready so I can go ahead and cut myself 6 pieces of the board to make a nice box to hold and house all the pieces for the keyboard. Now that the pieces are all cut out, it's time to mark it where I need to drill all the holes. I made this little stencil out of a poster board and you can see all the places I need to drill. I just take some painter's tape and I tape it to the board itself just so I can hold it in place while I go ahead and mark it. You can see it's nice and flush with everything. I take this tool right here with its patented pointy bit. And then I just go ahead and line it up to all the small holes that I need to drill. And once it's lined up, I just push it down to push it through the poster board, leaving a little dent. Then I just go ahead and do that for all of the holes that I marked on here. Once I did that, I just went around with a Sharpie just to dip it in the hole that I made, just so I can have some extra marks so when I remove the poster board, you can actually physically see it with your eyes as well. Now with everything marked, it's time to take this 30mm Forstner bit, set it up in my little hand drill press. I pull out a timer as well just because I'm curious how long this is actually going to take me. And I line it up with my first little mark and I go ahead and drill my first hole through it. Pretty smooth for the first one, only 84 left to go. I've never had to drill anywhere near this many number of holes before with this bit before, or just any in general. And honestly, I'm pretty impressed with how fast I did it. It only took 27 minutes and 57 seconds. I almost feel like it's a world record for a little hand drill like that. Pretty fast, and it's also starting to look pretty sweet. Drilling that many holes left over so much of this wood fluff. The stuff's pretty fun to play with, it looks cool and it just feels nice in the hands. With the faceplate done, it's time to take some sandpaper and just sand it with this little electric hand sander, just to remove any little sharp bits from all the drilling. Now that the boards are nice and sanded and smooth, it's time to set it up and put it together. So I just go ahead and start setting up the walls. Once I have the walls all in place, I take some wood clamps and I just clamp the sides together on each side. Then once I have the walls together, I lift it up, I just take a Sharpie, I mark it, I take a drill, and I just drill in some holes. I like to use some countersunk bits so that whenever I put in the screws, they sit nice and flush as well. I go ahead and do this to all the sides, and we got ourselves the walls to our enclosure. Pretty solid and looking clean. Let's get the bottom on this. I lay it flat, hold it with some clamps, I measure, mark, drill, and screw it into place, and this thing is coming along. And the last is just the faceplate. So I hold it in place, clamp it, drill it, screw it, and this thing is finally together. You can really see the shape of it and what this thing's gonna look like. There was a couple little blemishes that I just fill in with a little bit of wood filler, but once it dries and you sand it, you'd never even know that it was there. And the last step is some coatings on top. I take myself some nice looking wood stain, I take a brush and I just stain it all over it. Wood stain is just a nice little finishing touch for any wood project, and once it's nice and dry, I go ahead and add a nice thick layer of clear coat on top of it, and this is just going to really seal and protect this wood, especially since it's a keyboard and there's going to be a lot of hands touching it. You definitely want to seal on it. And the enclosure's done. I think it turned out really nice. It looks really slick. It's got some nice color to it. It's got that nice shine to it. And that extra thick layer of clear coat on top is just so much nicer on the hand, especially when you're going to be using this as a keyboard. Now it's time to get serious. Time to start installing all of the buttons. I can already tell this thing's going to be so much fun to use. Next step is time to start wiring up some switches. The switches are easy to wire up. The 2 wires just kind of slot into these little pegs, and then it has a nice little connection at the end of it. And after about a half hour, we got all of the wires attached to the switches. And now it's time for the long task of screwing on all of the little round discs on the bottom of the buttons, then sliding in all of the switches without having them block and knock into each other, which was quite a bit of time to finagle, and a lot of the places are really tight for my fingers. But this thing was looking pretty sweet, and I've never seen this many wires on a project I've done before, and I'm just overall really happy with the way it looks. I mean, just look at it. It looks crazy. If you showed someone this, they'd have no idea what it is. But it's a keyboard, and now it's time to attach these wires to something, and that's where the keyboard comes in. And the first step is to remove all the keycaps on this. And when I removed all the keycaps, I was honestly having a lot of fun on the keyboard just like this. I've never seen a keyboard like this, and it was just a lot of fun to push the buttons. And plus, it left me with all these little chiclet keycaps that remind me a lot of bubblegum. Next step is to remove all of the switches. My keyboard came with this tool to pull out the switches, and it was pretty hard and hurt my hand, so I ended up using just some pliers, which was not the best because it definitely destroyed some of the switches, but I'm not that worried because I'm not planning on using them. But after a while, we got all the switches out of it. We're so close to getting the circuit board, there's only just a couple screws in the way, so I've removed the screws on the little metal faceplate, and then the board just pops off. You can see the bare circuitry of the keyboard. And it looks like the little USB-C connectors on its own little board, which is really nice so I can move it wherever I want inside my box. So with the brains of the keyboard out, it's time to start soldering on a bunch of wires. I pull out my little soldering station, I get it all ready, I turn it on, get it up to temperature, turn on my little ventilation fan, and prepare myself for the long journey ahead. So these are the wires I'm going to be attaching to the keyboard, and they fit perfectly with the wires from the switches. I add a little bit of flux. I slot in the wires I just showed, and then I take a little bit of solder on my iron and I just touch it to it, and that solder just absorbs it into the little pit, connecting these wires nice and secure. 84 left to go. So not only is this project going to be the most holes I've ever drilled, it's also going to be the most wires I've ever soldered, and I'm really happy with the way it turned out. It was really easy to do with the flux, and it turned out nice. Almost looks like some hair or something like that. Pretty sweet. There's one more step I want to do before I go ahead and attach the switches wires to the keyboard wires, and that is I need to label this thing. I got myself some stickers, and I also have this label maker that I'm going to be using for some of the more trickier buttons like the escape key. So now it's time to start the tedious task of removing all of the stickers and placing them perfectly on all of the keys. This thing is looking amazing, the colors, the labels, but we've also reached the part of the build where we forget to do something, and that is, we forgot to have a way to get this cord in here. Looks like we gotta drill a hole. So I go ahead and mark the center on its side, and I just start drilling a hole through it. And after a little bit of cleanup, we can now see the USB-C cord will fit in perfect. Then I'm going to go ahead and take that USB-C cord, I'm going to attach it to the bottom of the little keyboard itself, just like that. And now we're going to take this enormous squid of wires and begin to attach it in order perfectly to all of the micro switches and all of the arcade buttons. This is definitely a very tedious process, but I made it simple as in all of those switches and wires have these nice connectors on the end of them. So if I ever need to move everything around, I don't have to unsolder or desolder anything. I can just literally unplug it and plug it back in. It's pretty daunting just staring at this huge squid of wires, but it really just takes time and you have to kind of comb through all of them to find the one that you're looking for. For the spacebar itself, I decided to link up 5 buttons to one switch. So I'm going to be taking all of the heads on 5 of them, cutting them off. Then I strip the wires on all of them and I take all of the white segments, I twist those together. Then after that, I go ahead and take the blue segments and twist those together. Then I slide over some heat shrink tubing on the wires. Then I go ahead and take one of the end connectors and attach the white sides together. Then I go ahead and attach the blue sides to the other side. Then I just take a little bit of solder and put it on each of the connections just to make it nice and permanent so I don't have to worry about it coming undone. Then I slip over the heat shrink tubing and I heat seal it with a little bit of flame. So now I have it that all of these 5 buttons are just going to one output for the spacebar. With just a few more connections to be made, this whole thing is just about to be wired up to completion. I then take a little bit of electrical tape and I tape over the connection on the USB-C port just to make sure there's no shorting going on underneath it when I seal this thing all up. Now to keep the circuit board from moving around, I take myself some Velcro tape, I cut out some squares, and I just stick it on the bottom of the circuit board itself. This is just so if I ever move this thing around, the circuit board's not going to be sliding around in there, even though the wires are keeping them pretty secure. And I just go ahead and stick that down to the wooden floor. The only thing left to do now is to gently close this all up without catching any wires in the corners and putting in the final screws to close it all together. So with the final screw in place, this amazing ultimate keyboard is finally complete, and I couldn't be happier with the way it turned out. The colors, the look, the feel, the labels. You can see I did the F's in purple, I did the numbers in blue, I have the letters in white, I have the symbols in yellow, I have the miscellaneous and spacebar in green, I have the arrows in orange, and I also have the escape key in red, of course. For size comparison to my normal standard keyboard, this thing is massive. There's no getting around it. It's big, it's chunky, but it is cool. I don't think there's a cooler keyboard out there, and there's only one thing left to do, and that is to test it. Typing on this keyboard was honestly a lot of fun. It took a minute to get used to, but after just playing around with it for like 10 minutes, I could pretty much type to my normal capacity. I'm sure it's a little bit slower, and my normal spelling errors and typing flubs are still there. And I'm definitely happy that I'd attached 5 buttons to the spacebar, so I'm not just searching for one small button for the spacebar. Since it's such a thick keyboard, I figured out that putting it on my lap was actually a lot more comfortable and easier to use. It almost just felt like an arcade control on top of my lap. Sure, the thing is heavy and a lot bigger than a normal keyboard, but it's still a lot of fun to use. Of course I had to try some gaming on this thing. I mean, it is made of some arcade buttons. So I loaded up some BioShock, and after about a few minutes, I got used to the layout and spacing of the keyboard. It's definitely more spaced apart than a normal keyboard and feels a bit different to play games on it, and smaller hands would definitely be a challenge. I thought it'd be super fitting to try a game like Metal Slug, which is originally like an arcade game, and honestly on this keyboard it felt perfect. It felt right at home, and I felt like I could even play the game better just because I was playing on it like on true arcade buttons, and that's just so cool to me. This thing is just going to be perfect for any like retro arcade games or just emulation. So overall, I'm super happy with the way this came out. I think it looks fantastic, I think it feels fantastic, and it's just a blast to make, build, and try it out. Sometimes you have ideas in your head and you just have no idea how they're going to turn out until you actually make it. And I'm happy I went ahead and made this. It was a lot of fun to do. All I know is the next time I have to work on my arcade machine, I have the perfect keyboard for the job. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you just saw something cool or just had fun. And I want to say thanks for stopping by. Hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all on the next one.